And Major Garrett joins us now from the White House. Also joining us is Jamelle Bouie. He's an opinion columnist for the New York Times. And Rosario Marín joins us from San Jose, California. She is the former U.S. Treasurer under President George W. Bush, the only person born outside of the U.S. to hold that position. Thank you all so much for being with us. Major, as we just heard in your piece, we have seen this president make racially charged attacks many times before and really suffer no lasting political damage. Is there any indication that this time might be different?
Well, there's always a chance it could be different, but if past is prologue, probably not. And certainly the president, based on my conversations with those in his inner circle, doesn't believe there'll be any political downside. Why? Because there hasn't been yet. After all, he is the 45th president of the United States. And many of those sound bites we just played came from the campaign, not his presidency. So the president believes there is something advantageous about drawing accusations of either being a racist or having racist motivations. What does he see to be the advantage? Well, he will argue to his supporters that the whole conversation about what is or isn't racist has become, from his perspective and the perspective of Trump's supporters, so out of shape, so misshapen by quote-unquote political correctness, it's lost its meaning. Therefore, the president says, you call me a racist, I'll call you a racist, which is what he did to Speaker Pelosi, essentially trying to dilute the meaning and the importance of that very explosive charge. The other dimension of this for the president, long running, is he invites the charges of racism to draw attention to some other issue that he wants scrutinized or evaluated more deeply, whether it's national security, immigration, the economy, or today, what is patriotism? What does it mean to love America? He wants to draw these lines as sharply, as brightly, as aggressively, and in some cases, in the minds of many, so menacingly, as to create an aura of intimidation and to rally his supporters around these concepts: economy, national security, immigration, patriotism. That's why he invites these charges. That's why he tends to weaponize them. And they will be, in his mind, important and potentially helpful until they are not.
So, Major, I want to go back to something you mentioned a moment ago. So Speaker Pelosi said that the president was trying to, quote, make America white again. As you noted, the president then called that a racist statement on Sunday. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on the ease with which there is this ability to dispatch, or I suppose relative ease, depending on one's perspective, but to dispatch these charges, which for any other political figure would be essentially political suicide?
Because the president, as a candidate and as president, oftentimes pretends what he said that was so incendiary either wasn't said, wasn't incendiary, or no longer matters. And because he knows, as the former GOP frontrunner, now president of the United States, he always gets the last word or the next to the last word. And so we very rapidly went from, wait a minute, you said go back to where you came from. 3 of the congresswomen that you mentioned in your tweet were born in America. How erroneous, how flagrantly erroneous could you be? And how not only not wedded to any sort of fact, but anything that's even credible in this argument. President blows right by that and just says, I'm just talking about America. Don't you love it? If you don't love America, maybe you should leave. Harkening back to a sentiment that was on bumper stickers when I was a kid in the late 60s, early 70s, America, love it or leave it. And if you want to sort of understand the ideological, if you will, incubator of much of the president's ideas about this, it is that period of time, 60s and 70s, when he believes America began to get pulled apart by racial tensions or racial entitlement or quotas, things of that nature. And he uses this language that is reminiscent to anyone who's alive then of those underlying sentiments. And again, he will continue to do so until it proves, if it ever does, politically injurious.
So as we heard earlier, the 4 congresswomen gave a rebuttal Monday. Let's go ahead and listen to some more of what they had to say.
We are more than 4 people. We ran on a mandate to advocate for and to represent those ignored, left out, and left behind. Our squad is big. Our squad includes any person committed to building a more equitable and just world. And that is the work that we want to get back to.
So, Jamelle, I just want to get your take on their response to the president's attacks.
I mean, I think you see with Representative Presley's response that they want to get back to concrete solutions, to doing work, to advocating for the policies that have sort of defined their tenure in the House thus far. All are supporters of Medicare for All, for example. All want to sharply curb the president's ability to detain migrants, to fund these facilities. And I think they would much rather focus on that. There was at the press conference talk of impeachment, and I do think that in at least some quarters there is a sense that the president's rhetoric here, the president's general behavior, it does deserve an impeachment inquiry. And I think it's worth saying in that regards that one of the articles of impeachment against Andrew Johnson in 1868 was that he was using the office of the presidency to advance white supremacy and advance sort of racist policy making. So that the idea that this would be connected to impeachment isn't actually very far-fetched at all.
Really interesting to hear that. Rosario, Congresswoman Presley said that Americans should, quote, not take the bait. From your perspective, does this perhaps seem to you like an attempt to change the conversation around other issues? It was just Friday, which seems like an eternity ago, that Vice President Mike Pence, for instance, was at a facility in McAllen, Texas, which was described in pool reports as being frankly overcrowded, that there was a stench in there, and there is a very heated debate, as you know, about immigration. Was this perhaps an attempt to change the conversation, change the subject?
Yes, I guess so. One of the most important things that we know of this president already is that he always comes up with some explosive tweet, explosive charges when he doesn't want something else to be noticed. That's his MO. We've seen it. It has worked for him until how Major said it doesn't. And it didn't work for him all throughout because he lost Congress. So there is, at least in my estimation, hope that there will be enough Americans saying we've had enough. We have enough of this racist, xenophobic, misogynist president. It's enough. When are we, and especially my Republican friends, when are we going to say enough is enough? We cannot go on like this. And I just believe that at one point in time, a lot of the Republicans are going to pay a very high price for not putting a stop to this president.
What do you mean by that, Rosario?
Oh, I think they're going to lose, just like they did in the last Congress. Believe me, Americans, we are better than this. We are better. Our country is better than what this particular occupant of the White House does and says. He doesn't represent Americans, and he does not have a monopoly on patriotism. When he was running, he said far worse things. That was the reason he was running, to change things because they were so bad. Well, I don't agree with the 4 Congress people in all of their policy positions. Actually, I don't agree with many of this. However, they have a right to represent their constituencies, whoever they are. And you know what? When it comes to it, Elaine, they got elected with 78%, 84%, 98% of the vote. He didn't even get that. He lost the popular vote by 3 million people. So when he's telling them to go back where they came from, well, they came from very strong districts. And if anybody's going to have to go back to where they came from, it should be him. He's also the son of immigrants and the grandson of immigrants. And his wife is immigrant. And his former wife was immigrant. So he does not have a monopoly on patriotism and who loves America. We all do.
So, Rosario, on your note to your fellow Republicans, some congressional Republicans did criticize the president's comments Monday. Texas Congressman Will Hurd called the messages racist, and here's some more of what he had to say.
Politically, it's hurtful. You are having a civil war going on within the Democratic Party, and now they've all circled the wagons and are protecting one another, right? So that's my thoughts. And unfortunately, for someone like me, who's the only black Republican in the House of Representatives, this makes it even harder when I go into communities that most Republicans don't show up to. This makes it harder in order to bring our message.
So the Democratic Congressional Committee, Rosario, has targeted Hurd's seat as one to flip in 2020. We've been talking a lot about how these comments might rally the president's base, but where does that leave moderate Republicans and specifically Republicans of color?
Right. Well, let me tell you, their job is very, very hard. And I tell you as one, I am from California. I had worked for more than 20 years trying to get Latinos to vote Republican. When this president decided to run and made his focus on anti-immigration policies and calling Mexicans rapists and criminals, that work that I had done for more than 20 years for this party went completely south. And I can see where many Republicans in California, are you kidding? We can't even find a good Republican in California. There are many seats that were lost completely. California is completely Democrat. Who do we owe that to? This president and his rhetoric. His very xenophobic, misogynistic rhetoric. And I say, stand up. It's time. You Republicans, you keep being silent, you will pay a price, as many of the Republicans that lost their seats in California have done.
Major, let me turn to you. Right after we heard from those 4 Democratic Congresswomen, the president hit back on some criticism from them. He tweeted, quote, "Democrats must give us the votes to change bad immigration laws." Realistically, is that a political goal to get some kind of immigration deal? Is there anything that you can tell us about what's taking place with respect to behind-the-scenes discussions on that front?
I'm not aware of any significant or substantive negotiations going on with House Democrats on other unresolved issues, long unresolved issues dealing with immigration. That is the president, again, trying to deflect, saying if there's a problem on the border, it's not my fault, it's not my administration, it's not any decisions that we have made or should be held accountable for, even though the record is very clear about a very different approach to interior enforcement and dealing with those who claim asylum status at the border and families being separated. All of that is in the public record, easily scrutinized. So take that for what it's worth. To Will Hurd's point a moment ago, Congressman from Texas, he said it's bad politics because it's unified the Democrats. That's true. It's unified the Democrats. I will say this. Here at the White House, the president does not believe it's bad politics. Why? Because he wants Democrats of all stripes, even those many in the 2018 cycle who ran as first-time candidates, who positioned themselves as comparative moderates to Nancy Pelosi and others in the party, to also defend these 4, pulling them all together so the president can say, en masse, the House Democrats are radical, progressive socialists. He even used the word communist today, suggesting they might be, I don't know, possibly could be, again, throwing as much incendiary rhetoric at the group, at the whole, as he can, while initially starting with individuals. Those of us who remember the 2018 midterm rhetoric, the president's target was Maxine Waters, the new face of the Democratic Party, a congresswoman from California who would likely to become, if Democrats won control of the House, and she did, head of the Financial Services Committee. Well, Maxine Waters has completely disappeared. A African-American woman, the president said he was corrupt, stupid, didn't know anything about legislating, didn't know anything about politics. She's completely disappeared. Why? Because the president has found new targets to try to create this. From these, you can judge the entire group of Democrats. So when Will Hurd says, hey, they're all circling the wagons, gathering together, uniting, the president says, exactly. That's what I want to do. That's how I can then, from his perspective, I'm not saying this is going to work. I'm just trying to explain the mentality behind it, or whether it should work. That's for the voters to decide. Will work, should work, not my game. What I can tell you is What is the underlying thought behind it? Unified Democrats defending these four, the president can therefore, he believes, label them progressives, socialists, radicals.
Right. So then, Jamelle, let me ask you, based on what Major just outlined, right? We know that these tweets from the president came after this increasingly public infighting between House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the four Congresswomen. And now we have seen Nancy Pelosi come to the defense of these lawmakers since. Nevertheless, with respect to defining one's opponent ahead of the 2020 election here, is that something that could hurt or help the party, the fact that these four freshman Congresswomen now have this elevated stature?
I mean, to Major's point, I think one thing that's worth noting about the president's 2018 attempt to define the Democratic Party around Maxine Waters is that it didn't work. The Democrats weren't defined as Maxine Waters. In fact, voters came out overwhelmingly to either support these moderate candidates or just to vote against Trump. But I think that for as much as the president is going to try very hard to tie Democrats to these four Congresswomen, as much as defending them may sort of perhaps bolster that, although I have my doubts. The fundamental fact of 2020 is it's going to be about Trump. It's going to be about Trump's behavior. It's going to be about Trump's record. And one thing is clear if you just look at the polling over the course of his presidency, Trump is most unpopular when Americans believe that he is using racist rhetoric, indulging his racism. The nadir of his popularity was the Charlottesville remarks. Every time this comes up, he sees a drop in popularity. And so although it may energize his base, and that's no small thing, it does turn off many Americans. And I think that when asked to choose between a president who indulges racist rhetoric and a Democratic Party who maybe there are members they disagree with, but who's trying to stand up for immigrants, for people, the kinds of people who live in their communities, I think most Americans are going to side with the latter over the former.
What about, though, the renewed calls for impeachment? Because we heard both Congresswoman Ilhan Omar as well as Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib talk about that. Congresswoman Tlaib said that she would favor opening an impeachment inquiry. I mean, this is something that, Jamelle, as you know, Speaker Pelosi has repeatedly said she does not want.
Right. I mean, I think the dispute about impeachment among Democrats gets to sort of one's theory of the electorate. Impeachment supporters will argue that, look, the president has arguably committed impeachable offenses. The president is deserving of serious investigation of his wrongdoing and misdoing, and so we should provide it. And the polls show not a majority for impeachment, but a growing number of Americans who feel that is appropriate, and at least a majority who believe that there should be investigations about the president's behavior. On the other side, you have Democratic moderates, Speaker Pelosi, who argue that, listen, the most important thing we can do over the next year and a half is protect the House majority and elect a Democrat in the White House. And impeachment is risky. It may end up galvanizing voters against the president. It may not. It may backfire. And so rather than take the risk of it backfiring, we should hold off and focus our attention on 2020. Now, I think that risk-averse approach had its own downside, which is that you could end up demobilizing Democratic voters ahead of the election, showing the people who voted for the House majority that maybe giving Democrats power isn't actually going to do anything to hold the president accountable. And that's a real danger to consider as well.
One last question, Rosario, if I could just ask you, given what you told us and the depth of your feelings about this president and this administration, what do you say to people who may ask you, why do you continue to be a Republican in 2019?
Hi, Elaine. I wish I could answer that. I really don't know why. Maybe there is just this hope that this nightmare will end in 2020 and we could go back and be the Republican Party of Reagan, the Republican Party of George Herbert Walker Bush, the Republican Party of George W. Bush, the president that I so proudly served. Maybe it's just that hope, Elaine. But let me tell you, it's weighing on me. It's just very hard. I cannot explain to people why I'm still a Republican. I want to be the Republican, the proud Republican I've always been, he makes it very difficult, very, very difficult. However, I will only add one more thing, Elaine, if I may. I don't think we are coming to the defense of these 4 Congresswomen. First of all, they don't need any defense. But I believe we're coming in defense of America and what we stand for, and this great nation made of immigrants from all over the world. I think when we do that, I think we all win.
All right, on that note, Major Garrett, Jamelle Bouie, Rosario Marín, thanks so much to all of you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.